Hi, good night, everyone. Good night, good night. Welcome, welcome. It's nice to see so many people thus far on this chat. Tonight, we are going to be doing blockchain and cryptocurrency. And our presenter tonight is Larry Pereira. Larry Pereira, who has a wealth of knowledge of these two type of currency that are revolutionary, and it's here. So I hand you over now to Larry Pereira. Take it, Larry, all yours.
Thank you so much, Colleen, and a pleasant good night to each and every one. I'm so happy to see so many of you on the call. I'm sure many persons will be joining in on this call. This call is being recorded, and this is going to be a mini series, a series entitled An Introduction on How Blockchain and Cryptocurrency is Disrupting the Monetary System. I thought it best that we should start the ball rolling as we closing off 2019 to begin the process of educating the community because it's important for us to understand what we are a part of. We are truly a part of a unique opportunity, but we also need to understand what is the disruption all about? What is this technology that's being spoken of in many circles? And now you have the opportunity. This is an introduction. There are going to be many more. We possibly might do two more before the ending of 2019. And this is to help you begin the process of understanding what are some of the terminologies. Now, the reference materials that I've taken is from this unique book, and I would advise you to get this copy of this book and read it. It's called The Internet of Money. It's been published a couple of years ago by one of the leading experts in blockchain revolution, I have to put it. And his name is Andreas M. Anatopoulos. And the information for this Zoom was researched from this book by Andreas Anatopoulos, as well as the video content I will be sharing as well in this Zoom. We should be going approximately 40-45 minutes. These materials are used for education and illustration purposes only. So just wanted to reiterate the points of where I would have gotten this information. I have been doing this level of research for the last couple of years, and I'm actively pursuing a degree program in blockchain and cryptocurrency as well. And I thought it best that we begin the process of assisting many of the persons in this community to begin to understand, because I believe we must understand this technology for what it is. We must speak the right language. And when we speak the right language, we become more confident, and also we attract into our sphere the right minded types of persons. And of course, we minimize the implications of us getting into trouble by speaking out of context information. And hence the reason why I decided upon myself that, you know what? Now is a perfect opportunity as we're closing off 2019, as we're beginning a truly unique year in 2020, that we should begin the process of understanding at least some of the basics. There's a lot of information. So, of course, we can't cover all this information tonight. But what I'm going to give you tonight is the foundation of this information. So, just a quick overview of what we will be discussing tonight. We will be discussing the history of money. Many of us are not acquainted with where money came from. What are the origins of money? The banking system. What is the banking system? What makes up the banking system? What are the components of the banking system? Is it a decentralized or is it a centralized model? We've been hearing a lot of those terminologies these days in the internet and digital space. We'll be talking about blockchain from a purely philosophical point at this stage. In our future discussions, we'll be going more and more in depth in terms of what this blockchain really is about and what it means for the whole economic system of the world. And of course, as we end tonight's Zoom presentation, we will be discussing what really is blockchain and Bitcoin. We need to understand what is Bitcoin. What is the right definition of Bitcoin? So you put Bitcoin in perspective. Yes, you would have heard that Bitcoin is the grandfather of cryptocurrency, but we need to put Bitcoin in its perspective because many persons think that Bitcoin is just about cryptocurrency, but there's so much more to Bitcoin than just the cryptocurrency. We have to identify and look at the aspects or what we'll call the technology, the disruptive technology that makes up the blockchain, that really started this whole process since 2008. So, what is the history of money? When you look back for thousands of years of old, money is as old as civilization. What you may not have recognized is money is a language. And this language is a form of communication that exists between persons, communities, nations, countries for thousands of years. If you would have taken two persons and put them on an island, a deserted island, it's only a matter of time before they would have developed some form of money because it is a language. It is a social construct. It helps us to interact with each other. It's used as social interaction through communicating value with each other. So it develops social bonds. And it's also important to recognize that it's the basic level of money that started many years ago, which is what we call bartering, which we will discuss very briefly because that's where it all started. But then there are many different types of barterings, but we're going to just look at bartering as the basic form, that communication of value. Because money is a language by itself, it's a social construct. So if you weren't sure as to where money originated, money is as old as language and dates further back to even writing, and that's thousands and thousands of years. So, as a society, as human beings, we indelibly are social creatures. And because we are social creatures, we also have the ability to create a social construct. And that's where money, in its beginnings, started thousands of years ago and saw its maturation in the Greek civilizations in Lydia, where we got evidence of gold coins being minted at that point in time. And since those particular eras would have transpired uh, a behavior, a pattern, if we would put it, as it relates to what money evolves to, the good, the bad, and yes, if I would say, the ugly components of what happens in our civilization when we become too centralized in our behavior and the corruption takes place. And that has been inherent for thousands of years. History has recorded it, and the problem that exists as a society, and we need to take a look at what that represents. So, the bartering system, tens of thousands of years ago, started with the ability to transcend value, to communicate value, to be able to set up a social structure of many kinds. And what that was is that we would exchange basic things that we would need. If I wanted fish, I probably would have exchanged maybe chickens, and thereby we would have exchanged something that we would have called live value, meaning that we saw it in front of us. We could have identified it, right? For thousands of years, humankind, the human civilization, would have used that form of bartering in order to exchange value. I didn't have fishes, I wanted chickens, or I wanted vegetables, or anything of that nature. We had to agree on the value. So, value then had to be a social construct because it was direct interactions. And of course, as time went by, we moved away from direct bartering in what we would call an abstraction form of money. And that saw the introduction of shells and beads as a representation of value. So no longer would we have to put a cow on our shoulders or goats and travel large distances to exchange with one another. We could now agree, once it's within our borders, that let's say the shells and the feathers and the beads represented X amount of value, we now began that whole process. We began to become more complex in terms of our behavior, in terms of how we extrapolated value. And then now, as we progressed into the 15th, 16th centuries and we saw the advent of minted coins, coins became another adaptation, moving away from what bartering was all about. And it took thousands of years between those points. Because always remember that every time there is something new. Every time there is a new technology or a new way of doing things, there is going to be much skepticism. Just as how we are getting a lot of skepticism today in the field of blockchain and a greater aspect cryptocurrencies, that is no different, and it's healthy for us to be skeptical when we fully do not understand what we are dealing with. So it is normal behavior in humans to experience that level of skepticism. Of course, the Bretton Woods Agreement between 1945, the ending of the Second World War, which ushered in what we would know today as our current monetary system. So the abstract of money or the abstraction of money was the first major evolution. And that occurred when one exchanged something that could not have been eaten. Yes, when we exchanged something that could not have been eaten, we moved away from cows and chickens and fruits and vegetables to an iteration or an abstraction form of money, such as feathers, beads, shells, strings with knots, etc. That represented money because remember, by definition, money is anything as a society we agree on. But most importantly, whenever we create feathers, beads, shells, strings with knots, it's not that you can go down the road and find any kind of feather. There had to be an element of scarcity. So when we're creating this abstraction form of money, it had to evolve with that level of scarcity, just as much as money represents a level of scarcity today, especially with many of the commodities that's available right now, like gold in particular. So the second major technological evolution, which happened more in the 14th, 15th century, saw the introduction of precious metals. And that's where the definition of scarcity and the ability to transport this new form of value became more prevalent. Of course, it had to be divisible, meaning it had to be cut in various pieces, because that's one of the many characteristics of what money is. It must be divisible, it must be portable, it must be easy to deal with. We can give change, it must be easily accepted. And it took quite a long time. Now, the agrarian civilization, which is in the Middle East at that point in time, such as the Babylonians, the Egyptians, as well as the Greeks, sought to use this method of monetary instruments at that point in time. So the Middle East was, in fact, well established in terms of understanding the dynamics of what we would call the raw materials of money in terms of using gold and silver and bronze as being part of their monetary exchange. But the really interesting thing about it, when I actually discovered this whole aspect of money transformation, is that every technological evolution, which I just mentioned earlier in my overview, has a form of skepticism. And it took roughly 400 years when persons started to use gold and precious metals as a form of money or money. Everyone would have exchanged the value at that time. It took roughly 400 years, believe it or not, 4 centuries thereabouts, for persons to begin to understand that we can start using paper to represent value. And that's where another change in the dynamics and the behavior of money in terms of what it represented was. It was very complex. So skepticism is healthy. So when people are saying many things about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency or many of the other altcoins that are available on the market, many persons are not educated in terms of what this technology means. And hence, it is very important for us to understand the technology behind the cryptocurrency. Most people think that cryptocurrency is about buying low, selling high. That's only one tiny iteration of what cryptocurrency truly represents. Because cryptocurrency, in many respects, changes the behavior of how we interact with leading financial institutions and, of course, the monetary system. And because we are exhibiting a disruptive behavior in relationships to what we're experiencing in our monetary system, we are getting different viewpoints in the marketplace as it relates to, all right, what is cryptocurrency? And most institutions tend to fear what is definitely happening in the space today. So skepticism is healthy. Skepticism took a very long time before it changed the dynamics and the behavior of how money represents. I want to share a video now with Andrea Anatopoulos when he talks a bit about money. It's about 5 minutes long. I want you to sit back, take a listen, take some notes about what his definition applies to money.
Most of us cannot hold a 15-minute conversation with a 6-year-old about money because the 6-year-old has good questions and we have no answers. How does money work, Mommy? Well, the correct answer is, I have not a freaking clue, kid. I think it's something to do with the allocation of special drawing rights through the International Monetary Fund and World Bank in a free-floating system of market exchange currencies that compete through trade balances across an international spectrum of inflation-adjusted exchange rates that then can be used to create local debt that is issued by the Treasury in return for currency that is printed by the central bank, distributed to the banks that leverage it through a system of partial reserve leverage of approximately 10 to 1, and distribute it into the economy, creating either inflationary or deflationary effects, allowing us all to experience the velocity of trade through the exchange of an abstract token that represents the promise of future value depreciated by the rate of inflation and adjusted for the return on investment. So why can't we have more of it, Mommy? Why can't we just give everybody more of it? That conversation doesn't go that way. It usually goes, eat your breakfast, go to bed, clean your room. One day you'll understand. And that's the first lie, because you still don't understand. You ask the average person on the street, what gives value to money? Why does money have value? They have no idea. They have a theory. They have a fairy tale. They have a story. And that story is about as naive as believing that children come from storks that deliver them in bundles they drop through the chimney. It is about as solid as Santa Claus. What gives money value? But it says right there on the piece of paper, it says, by the full faith and credit of the Royal Bank of India. Or it says, by the full faith and credit of the Federal Reserve System. It says, one Federal Reserve note. Applies to all debt, public and private. Okay, this is what gives it value, a promise. But most people have no idea how that works. I guarantee you that if you ask the average person on the street, they will tell you that the reason the money has value is because somewhere there's a cave, a vault, a box, where the government keeps gold in direct proportion to the money that circulates, which has not been true since the 1930s, anywhere in the world. And yet, that is the Santa Claus fantasy that many people believe in. Or they believe that the government guarantees the value of money somehow, which then creates other interesting questions like, well, why does inflation happen then? Why is the currency collapsing in Zimbabwe? Did the government not try hard enough to guarantee it? That is the inconvenient truth at the core of our understanding of the world's most ancient technology, money, is that we don't understand it. We simply don't understand it. The truth is, you give money value. Why? Because you are participating in a shared hallucination with 1.5 billion other people in which you firmly believe that tomorrow this money will still have value. That if you go to the store and present one of these colored pieces of paper, someone will give you eggs, chicken, spices, water, sugar, salt, housing, healthcare, something for this colored piece of paper. And it really takes an incredible hallucination for us to believe this, because the paper itself is worthless. It's pretty, but it's not pretty at that level. Nobody gives you products and services because of how pretty it is, right? That shared hallucination took hundreds of years to be established. And it started at some point in the late 15th century with the introduction of paper money, gold certificates, IOUs, certificates of exchange, bearer notes, etc. Pieces of paper that could be exchanged in promise for something else. And then, in the most amazing magical trick our societies have ever seen, they switch the cups around. And you lift the cup, and the ball isn't there. You go, what? This was supposed to be redeemable for an ounce of gold, a pound of silver, something. No, not anymore. It's just a piece of paper. What gives it value is your belief that tomorrow if you go to the store, you can buy something. And the moment that belief suffers a crack, it shatters.
So if you've not heard this before, what gives money value is you. Because money, by definition, is anything that holds value or purchasing power over time. But since 1971, the game is on, where the United States severed its convertibility through President Nixon, the direct convertibility of US dollars into gold. Hence, we would have gotten the language of calling paper money because it was truly backed by a commodity. Unfortunately, from since 1971 to today's time, there's still a lot of persons who amazingly believe that money is backed by their government's gold or some form of value that supports it. And unfortunately, that's not the case. So if you're hearing this for the first time, it may come as a shock to you. But I didn't make this up. It's the reality is there. The writing is on the wall. You just need to go check it out. So you need to understand that when precious metals started to become represented in a vault, because it was already considered value at that time, it took well over 400 years or thousands of years after that to really recognize that. But 400 years now, the lag time to start now using paper to represent value. The moment that started to occur, more like in the 15th, the 16th, 17th century, when persons recognized that they could have stored persons' gold in a vault and give them an IOU, that was the beginning of a system of debt. And from since that time, hundreds of years into the future, to where we are now, looking through the portals of history, we recognize that it has become very structured, very technologically savvy in terms of what we think money is. And because we believe money has value, we continue to add that level of confidence that each dollar note represents. And in this system, in the banking system, it is known as a centralized system. And in this centralized system, you are the client, the bank is the server. Bearing in mind that this server does not serve you, let's get that point abundantly clear. And we're not here to bash any financial institutions. We are looking at the reality of the monetary system for what it is. You are not the client. You are the client, sorry, you're not the server. And this server does not serve you, it serves the master, which is the banking system itself. So when you begin to understand that we are reluctant to discuss money, in fact, almost all countries of the world, money is not part of the education system. Is it coincidental that we are not taught the dynamics of money and how it operates in schools? The previous iterations of money, that is when precious metals were used and stored in a vault, and we were given paper notes, that ushered in the beginning of debt, that form of debt. So before Bitcoin, and we're fast forwarding now, and then we're going back into the past, the previous iteration of money, when this whole money began, this whole concept of value being issued in exchange for precious metals that was stored in a vault, what that represented was a form of debt. And from since that time, we have become accustomed to what we think is money and what we think in our pockets because we call currency money. But when you go to the bank and you look at the rates, the forex rates, you see the currency rates of today. The banks call money the right language, but we use money interchangeably because we believe it has value, because we, the people, are the ones that are adding confidence in the system. But unfortunately, the system is not giving us that measure of control. So the banking system controls this architecture of money. You have no control, and let me repeat that. You have no control over any transaction. Every transaction is controlled by a third party. That's the bank. It's a centralized system. Banks have absolute control over your money and can take it away from you at will. And now, with the advent of terrorisms and the factor laws and so many complicated financial laws being passed that inadvertently is working against citizens, banks now have become the gatekeeper, and it's now a privilege to have bank accounts because 3, 4 decades ago, you could have walked into a bank and opened an account and you didn't need a job letter or anything of that sort. It sometimes behooves me as to say, if I'm putting my money into a bank, right, they now are asking me for requirements to put my money in their vaults. So the whole thing has changed. Absolute power definitely corrupts. Have you ever heard about the movie or seen the movie rather, Absolute Power? It was an old movie about maybe 6 or 7 years old. I think it's about a little older than that. Directed by Clint Eastwood. Absolute Power. I would advise you to go take a look at it because absolute power does in fact corrupt. So banking at once upon a time had liberated people's money from the realm of kings and everyday people. However, these systems today got so concentrated and even acquired more power, and this power has led to corruption. The current system does the opposite of what the main purpose of banks originally were designed from the beginning, and that was to liberate persons from kings, monarchies, and monopolies. So banks did play a significant role in the hierarchical system, which represents real power and authority from kings and queens and patriots and all of those that really held on. They were the monopolies, and banks gave people the freedom to have control over their money. That was the original intent of banks, and they have done so for centuries. Unfortunately, too much of a good thing can lead to a bad thing. When you look at this screen, you see that these are just some of the hierarchical systems, democracy, which is the the politics government, right? And now geopolitics is affecting currency and its behavior because every country has a different rate of exchange. And who gives one country authority over the whole world? That many countries, even in the Caribbean, currencies has to be adjusted for value. For instance, in Jamaica, it's about 139 Jamaican dollars to one US. Guyana is what, close to 200 now. Trinidad and Tobago just under seven. And of course, Eastern Caribbean still what, 275, etc. And all of these disparities has a lot to do with geopolitics. And that's affecting currency and the behavior, and by extension, what you are entitled to. Sometimes just by being born in the wrong country can exclude you from opportunity. And all of these things play a direct role into the current monetary system. There you have it, banking and education. These are all closed systems. And all of these systems today are broken. They do not represent the interest of those who make up those systems. And even those who are working in those systems, it does not truly represent them. So, from liberator to limiter, the current financial banking model was, or came rather, into existence since the 18th century, right? The 18th century industrial revolution, to be specific. It was effective in breaking monopolies of kings and feudal systems. Banking once liberated people's money. So banks were the good guys. And there's some really good people, some really honest, hardworking people working in those institutions. But what we are not talking about people, we are in fact talking about the reality of the current system. So systems became concentrated with more quiet power. And of course, these powers lead to corruption. There is ample evidence that banks over the last decade or two were involved in questionable transactions. I've spoken on this on several occasions with HSBC and many of those banks in Europe, some of the large banks being charged by doing illegal activities. But it's not here for me to really make banks look the bad guys, but we're saying that absolute power at times corrupt. And that's what is taking place after centuries of managing the people's money. Systems tend to become corrupted because it's the normal, inherent DNA behavior of human beings to do corrupt things. It's almost like it's in our DNA. We were born that way. That too much of a good thing is a bad thing. Suddenly, someone wins the lotto and becomes a tyrant, and therefore people tend to use the saying, "Money is the root of all evil," and absolutely not. Money is not evil at all. It is the person that the behavior changes. So when we look at Bitcoin and the technology, because this is just an introduction to whet your appetite, because there's so much to be said, and I really don't want to go too long, but it's just to whet your appetite for you to understand some of the dynamics of the initial borders of what this technology represents. Because in order to understand Bitcoin, we first need to understand where money came from, the origins of money, and where it is evolving to. We need to understand the current system of centralized power, what the banking system represents, so that we can better appreciate what Bitcoin and altcoins represent. So, Bitcoin, by definition, is fundamentally different. You don't owe anyone or anything, and no one owes you. Bitcoin's protocol is not based on a system of debt. And likewise, all cryptocurrencies which came from this source code, because it is the grandfather of all cryptocurrencies, Thereby, it's the same thing. It does not represent that by its purest definition. So, as a result of that, the advent of cryptocurrency is a unique payment system that does not require the use of a third party intermediary anymore. And that's one of the most disruptive technologies that the world has ever seen. You cannot uninvent the Bitcoin technology, the Bitcoin protocol. Bitcoin is not just about the cryptocurrency, it's a regulated by algorithms, according to Andreas. It's being regulated or not being regulated by government bureaucracies. It is uncorrupted. So, what Bitcoin and what Satoshi Nakamoto did by extension was to create a unique technology because Bitcoin is a digital currency that came into existence about 2008 as an invention by a person called Satoshi. And Satoshi had published a white paper where he found a way to create a decentralized network that could achieve consensus, which is an agreement without any central controlling authority. That was the main thing. Now, prior to Satoshi, well over 10, 20 years, people have been working on creating a decentralized model. So it's not the first when Satoshi made that discovery, it was going on for quite some time. But at that time, Satoshi found a way to transmit value because a blockchain is now called the Internet of Value. It's the Internet of Money. That's where Bitcoin started. It's the first iteration. So, by definition, I want you to understand something about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the Internet of Money. But most importantly, Bitcoin is not a company. It is not an organization. It is a standard or a protocol, just like TCP and IP. That's like emails or the internet. It is not owned by anyone. It operates by simple mathematics rules that everyone who participate in the network agrees on. And through this simple mechanism, through this simple invention that Satoshi created since 2008, Bitcoin is able to allow a completely decentralized network of computers to agree on what transactions have occurred on a network, essentially agreeing on who currently has money. So if I send money from my account to you or to someone else's account, this is a peer to peer transaction. It's completely decentralized, not controlled by a third party. It's just like sending an email. There's no one in the middle. So, this particular solution, this invention, is far more important than what you see as Bitcoin, the currency. The currency is just the first app. It's just the first application that you can build on these distributed consensus systems. All right. So when you look at Bitcoin and you look at the cryptocurrency and you look at blockchain, imagine blockchain as, let's look at a very thick book and the cryptocurrency as being a coin resting resting on top of that book. It's just so tiny. It's just an app that represents one of the small and many features because the blockchain is totally programmable. So this particular solution, this invention that Satoshi added value to the world is far more important than the currency. The currency is just the first step. So when persons are talking about Bitcoin, they're generally not talking about Bitcoin as the technology, as the disruption, as the innovator. They are talking about the currency, and when they say that the currency will fail, they're not talking about the currency as a technological advancement. And one of the reasons you want to acquire cryptocurrency, especially Bitcoin and many of the others, Ethereum, Stellar Lumens, XRP. Many of them I would advise you to begin that process of acquiring as much of those cryptos as possible. Is what you are in fact doing is that you are participating in a community of a network, a community of technology that is adding innovation to the world. And each iteration of these altcoins has the Bitcoin protocol established in it. And as a result of that, you are in fact adding unique value through this innovation, through this technology. And this world is not going to recover as it used to with the current monetary system. That's why it is so disruptive. So it's the core, at the core, Bitcoin is really a revolutionary technology. It's already changing the world. Bitcoin is about the ability to bring to the world a level of financial integration that the world has never seen. And these are words quoted by Andreas Anatopoulos directly. So when you look at the innovative disruption that's already taking place, the financial platforms that have already been created are basically closed, centralized forms of technology. But when you look at Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency, the blockchain, it's really a protocol. And these protocols are not subjected to centralized models of control because it runs on a very simple mathematical algorithm. And if you really study mathematics, whether you did well in math or not is not the issue. But math is what? The language of truth. And therein, in this language of truth, we do not need third parties. So this offers no centralized appeal. So the real concept, the real aspect of what blockchain technology represents to the world is a level of innovation that transcends the current centralized models that are no longer applicable simply because since the discovery of the internet, which is now transnational, transborder, it's all over the world. Don't you think now that if you have a transnational platform where you can exchange value in the internet, that you would definitely need a transnational currency? And in this case, it's cryptocurrency that is in alignment with what's taking place in the fourth industrial revolution in the digitized economy. And that's why the current model of the financial world cannot work and it's already cracking, it's already falling apart. But the empire is going to fight back. They're definitely not going to take this line down. And that's why you need to understand what this technology represents to you, the value it's going to bring, the innovation it's going to bring, the transformation in terms of your finances, what it's going to bring. And that's the technology you need to be grounded on to understand unequivocally what this really all means for you. Because at the end of the day, this technology is not going to go away. And we are just beginning to tap into the many and variable uses of what blockchain technology really truly represents. So at the end of the day, blockchain, Bitcoin has been the beginning, but most certainly is not going to be the end of this innovation. Now, there have been negative outcomes by design, but institutions, through their own design architecture, if you want to put it that way, definitely produces outcomes that are not always in the best interest of you and me. These institutions, meaning the financial systems, they tend to produce outcomes that are restrictive, expressing nationalism, tribalism, class structure. And a lot of these things make the world a smaller place. But since the establishment of the internet, it has become an enormous power for decentralization of communication. And it's a very liberating force. However, ladies and gentlemen, the banking system has retracted in economic opportunity over the last 10 years since the advancement of blockchain technology. So the opportunity is decreasing because they're becoming more and more centralized and restrictive in their methods of operation. So as I close, and I'll share with you a video as I close, we live in a world that is increasingly global. and interconnected. And while our financial systems are not interested in real economic freedom, banking and finance form a network's perspective, are structures that are separated based on borders and jurisdictions, and really play a significant role in geopolitical events because governments influence politics and politics influence how currencies behave, and currencies affect society, by extension the people. So based on where you live, your currency might already be working against you. Geopolitics is affecting the world in a serious way because the combination of state and money produces toxic effects. The combination between the state produces toxic effects. And these toxic effects manifest itself in how we interact with financial services. If your country goes through a devaluation, it means that you're going to lose more purchasing power. It means that you're going to be paying more for exports. It means that it's going to be more difficult for you to travel. If your country says that it's hard to get forex, as is in the case of Trinidad and Tobago for the last 4 years, it's been very difficult. You're traveling and you barely could get 100 or 200 US to come out of the country. These are restrictions that no longer is acceptable in a digital age. So as I close off, I want to thank you so much for listening. It's now 8:45 here in Trinidad and Tobago, and I want to share with you this video as our final closing comments on a perspective that we must truly understand in terms of where this world is going. Thank you so much. Let's take a look at this video.
Uber is being rumored to be taking it, but I'm guessing we're not expecting that.
That wasn't, yeah, that rumor was debunked pretty quickly. There's a lot of complexities but the sharing economy, quite interestingly, is a great opportunity for Bitcoin.
You expect that to take off before the retail does, right?
Yes.
Okay.
But more important, actually, the thing I expect to take off first in Bitcoin is very cumbersome cross-border transactions, and there are three categories of that. The first one is companies that need to pay suppliers, subcontractors, and partners all across the world. Google has 20,000 affiliates they need to pay every month. Many companies have outsourcing partners, sales partners all over the world. Travel and hospitality companies, airlines, et cetera, parts companies, automotive companies. And these cross-border transactions are horribly expensive, very slow, extremely cumbersome. They have huge overheads and friction. The second one is basic import-export. If you're doing transnational trade, then using a transnational currency actually makes a lot of sense. There are disadvantages with the dollar. There are disadvantages with traditional wire transfers that Bitcoin solves. So it's practical. And then the really interesting one for me is foreign remittances. There are maybe 100 million people who are working as immigrants in developed countries, and they send $560 billion home every year through companies like Western Union and MoneyGram and things like that. And for that, they pay 9% as the average fee, netting Western Union a really handsome profit.
It's, yeah, shocking.
It's absolutely shocking. And a lot of that has to do with political constraints more than anything else. But that is an area where Bitcoin can not only have an immediate technological impact, but that impact translates into an enormous source of income for some of the poorest people in the world. Now, to put that into perspective, the $175 billion that goes to fees in the international remittances market is larger than the entire foreign aid budget of all of the world governments put together. So, and you would, instead of putting this in the hands of governments and trickling down, you give it directly to the poorest people. In fact, you give it directly to women in the poorest countries because they're usually the recipients of remittances, and they will take every single dollar and create $5 of investment in clean water, sanitation, healthcare, education, food, which has an enormous leveraged impact on poverty.
Right. So you sent me some statistics on banking. You said more than 2.5 billion people have no access to banking services. 4 billion have extremely limited banking services. Probably, like you mentioned, only 1.5 billion people enjoy the kind of international banking that you and I do.
Yes. What that means is that I can open a brokerage account in 24 hours and 24 hours later, I can be trading on the Tokyo Stock Exchange in yen that I use dollars to buy on equities. I could even get a loan from a Japanese bank, or then I could be trading in South Africa. I can repatriate all that money. My government is not going to try to take half of it or kill me for doing this. I can get loans. I can incorporate companies all around the world. I can wire transfer anywhere I want. That is privileged banking. Very few people have that. So what does it mean if you take that capability and you turn it into a capability that can be accessed from a text messaging Nokia 1000 phone that is in the hands of 4 billion people, more people that have access to clean water, in the most rural and remote parts of the world? They now have these devices because they give them a landline to the world. They give them a lifeline to the world of communication. What if that phone simultaneously is a banking terminal, a loan origination terminal, a remittance terminal, an international credit terminal, an equity trading terminal, an import-export payment terminal? That has much greater implications for what happens in the world than the enormous impact we've seen of cellular telephony in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, where it's brought communication to the furthest reaches of the world. If you go into some of these rural places, and I'm not speaking out of first-hand experience for most of them, but I have seen it myself in a few places, if you see a solar panel on a hut, that solar panel is not used to cook. It's not used to watch TV. It's used to charge the only cell phone in the village. That's what it's there for. And that one cell phone connects an entire village to the world. Now that cell phone is a bank. And that is why I'm in Bitcoin.
So that's it, guys. At the end of the day, just wrapping up here. So Bitcoin is not a company or an organization. It's like a standard, like the TCP or like the internet. It's the technology that's making possible decentralization like never before. It's solving many of the world's payment problems already. And the Bitcoin of 2008 is not the same as Bitcoin 2019. It has grown and adapted. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak on the introduction on this blockchain and money. And we went through quite a lot of that. And I'm sure and I'm hopeful that you would have taken some copious notes. And this basic introduction would have given you an impetus as to be excited about what the perspectives are for the future. Thank you so much. Have yourself a good night. Carlene, it's back over to you.
Hi, yes, I'm back. Thank you all for being a part of this presentation today. And just to remind you all, as it was mentioned at the beginning, it has been recorded. So even though it's a lot of information, it this recording will be posted, and as soon as it is complete, you'll have access to it, and you could actually go through it at your time. So you could go through all this wealth of information that has been brought to us today by Mr. Larry Pereira. Once again, thank you all for being a part of this presentation, and we look forward to the next.
Fantastic.
Okay, bye all, and
Thank you.
now.